So Wednesday marks 100 years since Congress gave American women the right to vote. As we prepare to honor that anniversary, we are taking a look back at the women's suffrage movement and the role Arizona women played in paving the way for our lawmakers today. 165 million and counting. Women make up more than half of the U.S. population, and Rutgers University states women have come out in droves, sometimes exceeding male voters in recent elections. Women are holding higher offices and influencing the next generation. But it wasn't easy getting to this point. Heidi Osselier, an ASU professor and historian, says the fight for women's suffrage was long and hard.
Women winning the vote was a very slow slog. When you talk about social justice in this country, it's more evolutionary than revolutionary. It takes generations sometimes to build that momentum.
The movement started in New York with the first women's rights convention in Seneca Falls in July 1848. 300 women attended.
The women that said, hey, we're equal to men. We should have the vote. We should have equal property laws and all these things. That was just an outrageous thought at that time. Women were legally classified in the same categories as children and people with mental disabilities. They had no rights.
It wasn't long before the fight for suffrage moved west into mining towns where voting was typically done in saloons.
That was not a proper place for a woman. So things had to change in the workplace and in the public life of women before they were accepted as voters.
A woman named Josephine Brawley Hughes in Tucson began the fight for suffrage in Arizona in what was then a U.S. territory. She used her influence at her husband's newspaper, the Arizona Daily Star, and his political status to gain support for women to have the right to vote. In those days, women were fighting to protect the morality of their families.
They believed that alcoholism was the single largest social problem after the Civil War, after slavery was abolished. And it really was a problem in domestic spheres. There's a lot of domestic abuse. Men were consuming vast quantities of alcohol. There was absenteeism at work, gambling.
Brawley Hughes enlisted the help of her friend, Frances Willard Muns, a teacher and political mobilizer living in the Pine community. Muns took over the movement, rallying groups of women, wives, widows, and young mothers. They traveled across the territory to places like Douglas, Prescott, and Phoenix, passing out pamphlets and giving soapbox speeches, telling everyone why women deserve the right to vote.
There's a lot of arm twisting. There's a lot of really smart political maneuvering on the part of Muns and her followers to get their endorsements.
The suffragist work took years. Many lawmakers refused to support women having the right to vote until after Arizona became a state. In November of 1912, Muns and her followers convinced nearly 2/3 of Arizona's male electorate to support women's suffrage, the largest popular vote for suffrage in the country.
The magnitude of Arizona's victory shocked the nation, especially the National American Women's Suffrage Association. They had spent very little time here, very little money. And when they saw that victory, they were just flabbergasted at the national level.
Arizona became the 10th state where women received full voting rights. The first election they could participate in was in 1914. Congress didn't pass the 19th Amendment until June 1919. Once Congress passed it, at least 36 states still needed to vote in favor for it to become a law. And the law was certified on August 26, 1920. And Arizona has been trailblazing ever since.
Arizona has been one of the leading states since day one, since women got the right to vote, to now in electing women to office.
Frances Willard Muns went on to serve in office, becoming Arizona's first female state senator, fighting for the rights of women and children. Her legacy carrying on for generations as more women continue to shatter the glass ceiling. Our state, the only to have 4 women serve as governor, the most in the country. Former Governor Jan Brewer sending us a statement saying, in part, Trailblazers like Frances Muns established a path for other Arizona women to follow, and for that, I am personally grateful. I'm honored to have served as Arizona's 22nd governor and grateful for all of the pioneering women over the last 100 years who fought hard and were relentless in their efforts to give women a voice in their government. They are true heroines who paved the way for all of us. Just last year, Governor Doug Ducey signed a bill allowing a statue of Frances Muns to be placed on Wesley Bolin Plaza outside of the state capitol. When the statue is finished, it will be the first statue of a woman on state-owned land. While the suffrage movement started with women like Frances Muns, today the torch is being carried forward by a new group of young leaders and voters hoping to make a difference.
Women tend to be voting for certain issues that they feel strongly about, and that's something that brought the suffragists into politics a long time ago, whether it was reform movements, temperance, other things. But I think that's an issue that continues for women today.
So as for the statue of Frances Willard Muns, the Arizona Women's History Alliance launched a campaign to raise $250,000 so that statue could be built and placed at Wesley Bolin Plaza. You can find more details about that campaign on their website. Meantime, our next story comes tomorrow. The women's suffrage movement wasn't without faults. Women of color and indigenous women faced barriers and discrimination when it came to receiving their right to vote. We are going to have more on that story tomorrow on ABC 15 Mornings.
5:42 this week, we're marking 100 years since American women received the right to vote. This is such an important series. It was a hard-fought battle, and in a lot of ways continues to be. ABC 15's Alison Rodriguez taking a look at the barriers that kept some women away from the polls, plus introducing you to those barrier breakers.
Record rapid work by the legislature. That's how some papers describe the ratification of the suffrage movement in Arizona in February 1920. It was an historic moment, and while yes, women had won their right to vote in State 48, many were purposefully still being kept away.
They could ask you to read a paragraph from the U.S. Constitution, and if you didn't do so to their liking, they could keep you from voting.
Historian Heidi Osalier recounts how before suffrage was passed, Congress was blocking Arizona statehood.
The committees that were looking into this there were too many men in sitting in bars all day, and there were too many people that didn't speak English.
Which is why they put literacy barriers to keep Latinas and other women from voting, hoping it improved their chances, and it worked.
There are a lot of Europeans as well who were not native English speakers, and they were naturalized and they were excluded as well. But those laws went on the books. The suffragettes went on record supporting that law, and it was a popular law.
Even though Native Americans received U.S. citizenship in 1924, they would be prevented from voting in Arizona until 1948. It would be nearly 7 decades before Native American women were represented in the state Senate when Jamesita Peshlikai was elected in 2016.
As the first Native American woman in the state Senate, it's my job to teach folks. And it's not about historical guilt or shame. It's about educating, and it's about waking everybody up and saying it's time to do the right thing.
Despite taking part in the suffrage movement, marching in parades, and passing out pamphlets, Black women would also have to wait decades for their right to vote. That came in 1965 with the Voting Rights Act, which also erased the literacy law on the books.
We were going through Jim Crow laws, black codes, incredible voter suppression, which ironically is very similar to what we're going through now.
Representative Dr. Geraldine Peaton is currently the only African-American woman serving in Arizona state legislature. She says women of color in political offices still face racism from voters and even fellow lawmakers.
No, it's not overt, but those little microaggressions that happen every day in our workplaces, they're there. So in terms of being comfortable and totally welcome, no. We still have some of those fights that we have always had, and we're still fighting to overcome them, but we will not let them discourage us.
Roughly 80 years after the ratification of the suffrage amendment in Arizona, Rose Mofford made history as the first female governor of the state. But in the late 90s, Arizona was thrust into the national spotlight when 5 women were elected to the state's highest offices. Governor Jane D. Hull, Secretary of State Betsy Bayless, State Attorney General Janet Napolitano, Treasurer Carol Springer, and Superintendent of Public Instruction Lisa Graham Keegan, dubbed the Fab Five.
And they're great photos of them. And Sandra Day O'Connor came out to issue the oath of office, and Polly Rosenbaum, the longest serving legislator, was there as a guest of honor. And it was just this moment where you go, wow, we have a governor, attorney general, all the top 5 executives are female. Wow, what's going to happen next?
In a statement to us, former Governor Jan Brewer said in part, from being one of the first states to send a woman to Congress in 1932 to electing the Fab Five, where 5 women were elected simultaneously to hold the 5 highest public offices in Arizona, the women in our state have always led the way for others to follow. The 2018 election would be another major year for Arizona women in politics. Kyrsten Sinema became Arizona's first female senator, followed by Martha McSally shortly after. Women won races for Secretary of State, Superintendent of Public Instruction, and Kimberly Yee became the first Asian American woman to be elected to statewide office when she won the state treasurer's race.
Well, back in 2010, I decided to run for office, and it was really a woman asking me to consider it. I had never considered that before.
Fighting back against her naysayers.
Really, you just have to stand firmly on the ground that we are here as women to have a voice at the table, and we certainly can't be pressured when someone tries to make that effort.
Women are still breaking through barriers, and Yee says she's hopeful there'll be more women candidates for office in the future.
How important it is that we can make that difference when we do engage, when we do step up to the plate, and we do have that voice at the table. Really, it's such an important task that we really just have to continue to encourage women to make those choices.
Allison Rodriguez, ABC 15, Arizona.
I also think of Sandra Day O'Connor, of course, who has roots here in Arizona, lives in Phoenix, another trailblazer, the first female on the Supreme Court. Allison, thank you for this series. Tomorrow we take a look at the group aiming to unify young women voters of color and why this group holds so much potential power in shaping the political landscape.
A big day here in the United States. Today we celebrate 100 years since the adoption of the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote. But that didn't include all women until decades later. Our Allison Rodriguez has more.
A 2019 Rutgers study showed 81.3 million women were registered to vote in the 2018 election. That was roughly 10 million more than men. And history is being made as more women of color hold bigger offices.
I feel that in order for us to be successful, we have to be able to show other women, and especially the younger generation, that they can do whatever they set their minds to.
Representative Alma Hernandez made national headlines when she became the youngest lawmaker ever voted into the Arizona legislature.
For me, it's a really big deal. You know, yes, we're celebrating 100 years, but I also realize that there's a lot more work that needs to be done.
It's a sentiment shared by State Senator Jamesita Peshlikai.
I'm always advocating for our children to look to being the next leader, the next senator, the next governor. And hopefully in my lifetime, we will have a Native American president of these United States.
In 2018, Arizona ranked #1 in the nation for female lawmakers, according to the Rutgers study, with women making up 40% of the state legislature. Today, that number is slightly lower, and 2 of the largest cities in the state have women as mayors. Regina Romero is the first ever woman to be mayor in Tucson and the first ever Latina, too.
They were excited. My family and friends were excited, so we decided to go for it. And we knew there had not been a woman mayor ever in our history.
Mayor Romero says she's still working to break through stereotypes of women in leadership roles.
It really takes some time. It takes some heartache, and it really takes some pushing on my part to tell people, I know you've always seen this and you're used to this, but I'm going to do things differently.
State Treasurer Kimberly Yee had to push through as well during her time in the state Senate.
The gentleman sitting next to me said, young lady, you're asking a few too many questions. And well, of course, my reaction was, let's ask 10 more questions.
Pew Research shows the minority vote will be huge this year. That's why groups like United States of Women are working to encourage those to participate.
Because as a low income, like first generation, like Latina, I, found that voting is essential and it's the way to exercise our voices at the polls. But my family and a predominantly Latinx community within Phoenix didn't necessarily believe that. And growing up, that's something that I heard all the time, that your vote didn't matter, that it wasn't going to create any sort of change.
Pew Research also shows this is the first time Gen Z will be eligible to vote. But State Representative Dr. Geraldine Peaton says getting younger people involved isn't always easy.
When I'm termed out, I would certainly hope that there's someone else to step in to represent women of color. But younger people seem to be disenchanted with politics.
The November election is already historic, with Kamala Harris becoming the first woman of color on a major party ticket. And she's only the third woman ever to run as vice president after Geraldine Ferrero and Sarah Palin. 100 years of progress with more to be made. All the women we've spoken to look forward to the day when a woman will sit in the Oval Office as commander-in-chief for the very first time. Allison Rodriguez, ABC 15, Arizona.
Allison, thank you for this series. By the way, today is Women's Equality Day, honoring the adoption of the 19th Amendment by Congress. And to celebrate, you'll notice this, the Arizona State Capitol will be lit up purple and gold, all to recognize 100 years of women's right to vote.